Howdy, and welcome to Baking with the Beard, a Bun Beard production all about how to make delicious sourdough bread from home with just things that you can find lying around the house. I call this stuff. If you're looking for the Bun Beard vlog, that's not what this is. The Bun Beard vlog is somewhere else on the channel. This is an instructional video that we're doing as part of a new series about transferring skills that we have and things we're good at to the rest of the world for you to enjoy. This is part one of probably about a 10 or 12 part series where I'm going to walk you through making your own sourdough bread. It's as simple as that. What we're covering in part one is very simple. What is sourdough bread? How to get started. There you go, part one. Easy. This is sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is, for me, one of the most rewarding things to be able to make. I love it. I probably bake 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes 1 loaf at a time, sometimes 2 loaves at a time. I learned last year in the summer from a top lad called Owen Blandy, aka the Biking Baker. He generously gave me a load of his time. I could ask him as many questions I wanted to, send back and forth videos of my progress, pictures, and that took me from not knowing anything about it to, well, to that in quite a short space of time. And the key thing in there that made that the key thing that made that work is that back and forth nature. And that's what you don't usually get from a lot of instructional videos or recipes. You can't really ask questions and interact. So my pledge here with this format is if you're following along from home, ask questions. Ask questions, send me photos on Instagram, on the stories on Instagram of how you're getting on, and I'll basically be giving you feedback each step of the way of how to tweak what you're doing and improve what you're doing. There's lots of things that can go wrong with sourdough. Not wrong, but there's lots of things that might be confusing with sourdough that just a little bit of explanation sends you on your way. Sourdough bread. Listen, I hope you can hear that. Oh, this is fresh out the oven about 45 minutes ago. It is fantastic. It's the thing again, all those high-end cafes and restaurants these days probably add with scrambled egg on it or avocado on it, or sometimes Jess and I will just eat just a loaf of this dipped in olive oil or balsamic vinegar. It is amazing for you. And because it doesn't use any chemicals, preservatives, or man-made yeast, it's really good for you. It's really good for your gut health. Baking yeast. Baking yeast is a man-made additive that enables anything you're baking to effectively become really active and grow. When you cook baked goods, they swell up. That comes from the yeast. That comes from all of the activity that comes with the yeast. In sourdough, we don't use yeast. Ugh, man-made rubbish, that's from a factory. In sourdough, we use our own yeast, this is Terry, that we've made using only flour and water. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to make part one, your own culture, your own starter. Yeast actually exists in all flour. All milled flour has got wild yeast in it. And what we effectively do by creating a starter is we allow that wild yeast to ferment and become really active so it can play the role in bread making of being that rising agent. The strength, how good your starter is, has a massive impact on how well your bread comes out. So focusing on this bit is really, really important. To get started, and for day one, you don't need anything more than some flour and some water. You can use any kind of flour to get you really started off. Some people say you shouldn't use all-purpose or plain flour, but to start, you can. It's not really a problem. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to do it along with you. I'm going to do it in this little jar here. I'm going to make a fresh starter. She's going to be called Juno. My niece named her earlier on. It's a living thing. It sits there and it ferments. As you combine the flour and the water and the ambient temperature of a room, it all ferments together and it brings out the active nature and creates that wild yeast that we're talking about. So we're going to make one of those right now. It's really, really simple. And this is step one. And we're going to keep repeating these steps for a few days until it's in the right place to cook. And then we're going to start baking a loaf of bread. So to help manage your expectations, I reckon you'll be ready to bake your first loaf of bread in 4 or 5 days. If it takes you a few more days than that to have a really active starter, don't worry about it. You might be able to do it quicker, but 4 or 5 days is usually typical. And we're going to kind of take you from the very first bake all the way up to kind of making it look real good. Right, how to make your own terry. Terry's the best name. As I said before, he's literally just the simple combination of flour and water. The quality of the flour, the better quality flour you can use, the better your starter will be over time. But if you just start with very basic, simple flour, it doesn't matter. Right now, where everyone's in a crisis, you might not be able to get all kinds of flour in the shops. So you can start with plain flour, and you can weave in other flours as your terry, or whatever you're going to call him, as he matures, as he grows up. I typically use strong bread flour, I use whole wheat flour, sometimes I use white flour in there, depends what I've got knocking around. When it comes to baking a full loaf, getting hold of some bread flour and some whole wheat flour is really useful. So if you're following along with this, try over the course of the next kind of 4, 5, 6 days to get hold of some bread flour. That'll make what you're cooking so much better, so much more satisfying. But to start you off, we're going to start with simple plain old flour. Right. This is real easy. Set of scales and a jar to put it in. Your jar doesn't need to be a kilner jar like this with a tight seal on it. Terry's lid sits loosely on top of him. You can do it in a jug if you want with a cloth to get you started and find something like this later on. Once your starter's grown up and matured a little bit, you quite often move him round into different jars because he gets a bit... let me show you. This is Terry's other house, which is just being cleaned because after a while, all of the dough that you're moving in and out of it, or the starter, starts to go a bit crusty around the outside, just where it's setting in the air. So every week or two, I take him out of one jar, move him into the other jar, give this house a clean. So anyway, any jar, anything will suffice. Figure out how much it weighs. This fella weighs 640 grams. Useful to remember that, but not vital. 0 the scales. So now this thing weighs nothing. Get yourself a spoon. This is my flour spoon. To get started, I'm going to use some bog standard plain flour. I'm going to use 50 grams of bog standard plain flour. Get in there. 45, 48, 50. It doesn't have to be exact, but close to exact is what we're after. Once you've done this a few times, you can start to do it by eye, but use a set of scales to help you out. Judging 50 grams of snake by eye is quite difficult to begin with. Right, I've gone for 50 grams of that fella. Today I'm going to use 50 grams of wholemeal flour to put in there with him. If all you've got is plain flour, just start with that. It's not a problem. Like I said, find some others over the course of the next few days. Spelt flour, rye flour, anything that is wheat-based, so not rice flour. All right? Anything that's wheat-based, any normal flour will work. This is organic stone ground. That'll work. This is organic traditional. That'll work. This is strong white bread flour. That's great. Love that stuff. Wholemeal bread flour. Pizza and pasta flour, not so much. That's what 00 flour is. It's quite different. I'd probably try and steer clear of that unless it's the only flour you've got, in which case it'll work to start with. Right, so we've got 50 grams of white flour in there. And I'm going to take 50 grams of wholemeal flour, which I've not opened this bag yet because I've got a vat of the stuff over there, so that's what's in this scoop. So 50 grams of that. Boof. Boof. Do, 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 do. Dum, 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 96. 100. Right. There's wild yeast present in that flour, and that combination is going to ferment together really nicely. Water is the next thing. Water makes a big difference. The quality of water, I find, really matters. Here where we live, we are blessed in that we get water naturally spring-fed off the hills. Only goes through kind of like filters to make sure it's safe. Doesn't have anything else done to it. So this water is great. If you're in the middle of a city or a town, try and filter your water if you've got quite hard or quite soft water, because it does make a real difference as to how the yeast and how the flour reacts. 50 grams of white, 50 grams of wholemeal, 100 grams of water. So we end up with a ratio of flour to water of 1 to 1. It's simple. If you don't have wholemeal, just go with 100 grams of white. It's easy as that. To get us started, that'll do you. Right, 100 grams of this bad boy. There we go. I put in 102 grams by accident. Doesn't matter. Not a problem. What we're now trying to achieve is mix it all up so there are no more dry bits. It's as simple as that. You could use, in an ideal world, when I'm doing my baking, I use this little baking mix stick. However, we're trying to do this based on things that you're going to have at home. So for this, you're not going to need any special tools or implements that you can't find in the cupboards. So this guy, we'll save him for later. Wooden spoon. The end of it is basically the same. Give it the scales. Bosh. Get in here mixed up here. So, what's happening now? You're blending 2 types of flour with an equal part of water. Those 3 ingredients are basically going to sit and coexist together until we revisit them again tomorrow. Right, so we've mixed it up, and the consistency you're looking for is that of, hold on. Right, we've mixed it up so there's no more dry bits. Now, all flours react slightly differently depending on their quality, and what I typically do as a rule of thumb is I add in a splash more water after I've mixed it all together, because quite often if you're using like a wholemeal flour, it's quite absorbent, so it can actually dry it out a little bit too much. We want this to be ever so slightly liquidy. I mean, look, I don't know if you can see how liquidy Terry is in there right now. He's due a bit of a feed, actually. So I always add an extra splash more water for good measure. Not lots, a little splash. Get that mixed in. We want the consistency to be not liquidy, but not solid either. So what you should end up with is something that looks a little bit like porridge. And that's step 1. Job done for today. Is that easy? How long did that take me? 3 or 4 minutes, throw it in there. We're now going to not seal it up, we're now going to pop his hat on him. Doesn't need to be airtight. And we're going to tuck him somewhere warm to live. This is a key consideration that people do not pay enough attention to when they're making a starter. When I first did mine, I did it all wrong. I put mine in the fridge, and that changes everything. There's a time and a place for that we'll come to, but think about a bakery. A bakery is super warm. They've got big old ovens going, cooking almost all the time. Everything's really, really warm in there. I used to work in a bakery when I was a kid, and you'd basically be in one of these and nothing else because it was so hot. That humidity really helps this, and this is why sourdough cultures thrive in a lot of bakeries, because their temperature is so consistent and warm. Find somewhere in your kitchen in your house that is consistently warm, whether that needs to be close to the oven. For instance, in my house, where we've got the pipe coming out the top of the Aga that's always slightly warm, I usually keep a culture close to that. It means overnight when the temperature drops, the temperature doesn't change too much in here, and the culture can do what it needs to do. It can thrive in the warmth. It's nice and active. If you put it by a window that gets really cold overnight, you slow down the whole process. So temperature considerations and where you put him is quite important. Let me show you that consistency. It's not watery that it's running off my fingers. It's not too sticky that it's sticking to them all. That's what we're looking for day one. Nice and simple. So, we've got our starter made. We're on our journey, going from this to this. There are some steps in between, but we'll cover them off as we go. The most important thing to do right now is recognise that sourdough takes time. Your first couple of loaves are going to come out as a bit of an experiment. They'll most likely be edible and be delicious, but it might not look how you want them to look. And that will improve as your starter gets older, more mature, there's more live cultures in there. He'll become better and better and better as your skills increase. On this journey, a couple of things to remember. Everything that we're going to use, you should be able to find around your home. If you can find some bread flour and or some wholemeal flour over the course of the next 4 or 5 days, great, but you can just start with good old simple all-purpose flour to get the ball rolling for this first step. Last key consideration. Name your starter. Juno, so that's the girl. Terry and Juno. By naming your starter, you give, in my opinion, you give yourself a reminder that it is a living thing. You're going to need to feed it regularly, a bit like feeding a plant. I'll teach you how over the next few days, but the first step is by giving it a character. Creates that reminder. Oh, I need to feed Juno. So, she's labelled, she's fed for today, she's going to get tucked away. Boom, ready. Terry, I'm going to do what I normally do with him in a minute. He's just baked this. Did I mention I've baked this already today? This is what we're working towards. That's it for day one. Nice and simple. Tomorrow, we're going to cover what you do next and what are some of the next considerations as we get closer to baking day. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that was informative. There's lots of stuff we're going to cover in the next coming episodes. If you've got questions, let me know down below, but also bear in mind, a lot of your questions are probably going to be covered off proactively in the next few episodes. Let me know what you're calling your starter. If you're not naming it, you're not doing it properly. Other than that, tune in hopefully tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow for the next stage of baking with the beard. Oh, I need a theme tune.